access, equity, and quality in education for all. If we have to reap the benefits of our demographic dividend, it has to be an educated demographic for it to be a dividend and not end up being a demographic disaster. So access to quality education is imperative. We have to provide an environment of teaching learning that equips children with the knowledge and skills required. Equity requires that all children are given the opportunity to achieve fair educational outcomes. Equity and inclusion and quality education. Is it a lofty objective? Are there myths attached? Do we have preconceived perceptions on this issue? What are our misgivings? Can we perhaps demystify this? Can RTE be an opportunity to broaden access to quality education by making it what it needs to be? Provocative question, and I'd like to invite Mr. Ramji Raghavan, a social entrepreneur, to share his story on how he has achieved social outreach and how he has, through his model, found solutions to the very questions that we are deliberating upon today. I had the opportunity to visit his campus in Bangalore, and what I found very striking was that the three major issues that we're talking about, I felt that they had inbuilt solutions in their campus. They had built an ecosystem, a self-sustaining ecosystem. So whether it was to do with teacher training, or it was to do with social outreach, or it was to do with peer-to-peer learning or practical hands-on learning, everything was happening there in that campus. And I think the solutions that they have found have evolved over time. They've come across challenges and they've tried to resolve those challenges, and I think that's the most beautiful part of his story, and I invite Mr. Raghavan to share his story of social outreach, of inclusion, of equity and quality education, and how can we maybe use it as a model for scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Amnita. You know, in the early 80s, I was a young executive with Citibank in the Caribbean. And that was the time when South America melted down, the debt crisis. And I attended a workshop in Florida, and at that time we had a brilliant guy called Ed Hoffman. He was a PhD in molecular biophysics from Yale, who was running Citibank in South America. And at dinner, Ed, I guess, wanted to show off to the rest of us. And he said, you know, last night I had dinner with Henry Kissinger. So we were all suitably impressed. And then he went on to say that Kissinger said, you know, what South America needs is another Marshall Plan. And that will turn around the whole of South America. And everyone said, yes, sir. And Ed, being the brave guy he was, put his hand up and said, I'm sorry, Dr. Kissinger, I disagree. So Kissinger kind of looked at him with, you know, who are you? And he said, I'm Ed Hoffman, I run Citibank in South America. The reason it won't succeed, or reason the Marshall's Plan succeeded in Europe, was that even though all their physical assets were destroyed in Europe, right, they had the mental infrastructure, the attitudes, the sense of entrepreneurship, the networks, the thought processes, the software. So when you went and pumped in 13 billion or whatever it was at that time, you had a lot of eager people who knew what to do with the money. They had ideas, they had projects, they were educated, qualified people. There was absorption. Now, if you went and did that today in South America, you'll find most of that money is wasted. And at worst, it would leak out into Swiss bank accounts, right? Because those attitudes and qualitative thought processes are not in place. Now, years later, when I started the Agastya Foundation, I was with an education official in Chittoor district. He wasn't as exalted as Ed Hoffman, but he said exactly the same thing to me. He said, you know, Ramji, if you want your foundation to succeed, don't do what we're doing. Change the attitudes of people at the grassroots so that when and if money actually reaches them, there are people who've got ideas who can use that money effectively. So to use the analogy of ecology and environment, an area where we're deeply involved, if the soil doesn't have the microorganisms, the minerals, then it doesn't matter how much it rains. You're not going to see the output. So the key challenge, as I see it through the Agastya Foundation, is how do you increase absorption capacity at the grassroots? And if there's no absorption capacity or low absorption capacity, and believe you me, that's actually the situation in a lot of backward areas, not just in India, but around the world, even in the ghettos and so on in the US, around the world. There's lack of absorption. So how do you increase that absorption capacity? So when I quit my job as a banker, I did some brainstorming with a lot of scientists in India, educators. I'm not a scientist or an educator. Teachers, students. We asked questions like, what does it take to raise the speed limit of creativity in a country? Is it even possible? What makes a person creative or innovative? Is it in your genes, or is it a skill that you can learn over time? And Dr. P.K. Iyengar, who had retired as the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, who I worked with very closely, said, you know, Ramji, this was 98, after the Indian nuclear explosions. We can handle the American sanctions, no problem. And the reason is we created this infrastructure of some 25, 30,000 scientists and engineers who can take on the gap left by the American sanctions. But the biggest failure of our system is we never instilled the creative temper or the scientific temper, never made an attempt to instill it in the masses of India. So when we built the atom bomb, which is no mean task, we were constantly scraping the barrel. We couldn't find people from the education system coming out with a creative mindset who could think out of the box, right? So if we can instill this in the masses through the education system, then we'll create a transformation, not very different from that absorption concept. So we said, okay, what will it take to do this? And we came to the conclusion that hands-on experiential learning can be a very important catalyst in making this happen. There are lots of studies to prove that, so I don't need to go into it. The second thing we said is, look, rather than build a school, there are lots of people like yourselves who build and run excellent schools. That's not our strength. Let's build a school for schools. Let's create an ecosystem, as Avneeta was saying, that would support thousands of schools at the grassroots. Raise the level of the ocean even by a millimeter rather than fill a bucket, if you like. So very excited, we went and bought 200 acres of land, barren wasteland, about 2 hours by road from Bangalore, and said we're going to anchor our dream institution here. Fantastic news. The bad news is we ran out of money, right? Because this was 2000 and dot-com bust. So what do? So we huddled. We were very good at that, and we still are very good at that, at huddling. And somebody said, look, I think we've got this wrong. We're thinking in terms of building buildings, a Taj Mahal, and attracting poor children and teachers to our campus. How about if we reversed it and said, let's go out to them? So how do you do it? How about a mobile lab? So I called a friend in Hindustan Motors. He loaned us a second-hand vehicle. Iyengar got the Homi Bhabha Center to gift us a trunkload of very low-cost, ingenious science experiments made of things like coat hangers and balls of string and even potatoes to demonstrate density and all that kind of thing. And we took our tractor driver on campus. He had no job because there was nothing to bulldoze now, right? And we set him loose in the villages. He went around. A few weeks went by, and I asked him, hey, Balram, how's it going? He said, fantastic. They love it. So all this interactive, participative stuff. And you know, I never thought teaching could be so much fun. He was a BA, not even a BSc, but the Homi Bhabha guys said he's smart enough to, learn basic science. So I said, continue doing that. And he continued doing it. Today we have about 75 of these mobile labs. In 9 states in India, they touch nearly 1 million children a year. And it's evolved. A mobile lab is great, very seductive, but it's mobile. So we said, let's have stationary science centers. to support these mobile labs, and we call it our hub and spoke model, a distribution system, if you like. Early on, I remember my father telling me one of the biggest, and he was not an educator either, but he ran a lot of very large companies in India, training a lot of staff, and he was a people builder. And he said one of the biggest problems we have is in teacher training, you ought to look at it like a medical college and a hospital. You can't get a medical degree unless you go around looking at people with ailments and problems and cadavers and so on. That doesn't happen in teacher training. So let's co-locate our teacher training center with our labs. So what have we achieved? Over the years, we've touched nearly 3, 4, 5 million kids. Okay? We've created a model now. I think it's a scalable model, starting with our campus that we call our creativity lab, an intermediate layer of core science activity centers, mini science centers, mobile labs, and now a new layer called the lab in a box, which actually increases the reach and the richness of the mobile labs. We have a joint program with Dr. Kalam running mobile labs in Darbhanga. And he said, Ramji, we've got to try and replicate your Karnataka system in more states. So I think we've got a scalable model, but we have to work with government, because no private individual, whether you're Rakesh Jhunjhunwala or anyone else, is going to be able to fund all this. So working with government is critical, and you build the expertise over time to deal with government, the ups and downs. We all know that. But on the whole, I have to say, friends of mine who are still in banking, some of them, I guess, would rather not be known as bankers today, tell me, we used to think, how can you ever achieve anything there? But, maybe it was a combination of luck and a lot of help from a lot of very well-meaning people. The government, on the whole, has responded very positively, on the whole. And we've been able to do some things. For 5 years in a row, our kids, we have a program where we teach children to teach children. We work with about 10,000 kids. It's called the Young Instructor Leader Program. So we touch about 1 million children a year, but maybe 5,000 to 10,000 go through this Young Instructor Leader Program. For 5 years in a row, they've been winning the Intel Iris Science Award. Dirt poor kids. I was there. I came to Delhi also to attend the function, the Intel Awards, and our kids from Kuppam had made it to the final round. So I asked them to do a demonstration and show me what they did. And there's this boy who showed me a herbal hand sanitizer and how they had prepared it and all the different combinations of herbs and so on. And it was all very nice and, impressive. So I asked him, what does your dad do or your mom do? He said, my dad's a stone cutter, sir. Now, I go to Kuppam often, and if you take one route, as you near Kuppam, you'll hear the sound tick, 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 and you see them all squat around the roads, cutting granite. And his father is one of them. Now, in my book, that's transformation, whether he won a prize or not. By the way, he did. But the point is, competing with 3,000 project submissions from across India, the point is, there's enormous amount of potential out there, as we all know. There are ways and means of reaching it and bringing it out quite effectively and raising that absorptive capacity. Now, as I said, it may be a bit like raising the level of the ocean by a millimeter. They may not turn out to be C.V. Ramans or Ramanujans or Khuranas or whatever. Or they may, who knows. But the point is, you get that basic fertility of the soil going on a mass level. Then things can happen. Otherwise, we're going to put up our hands, as most of the policy makers do, and wealthy businessmen and everybody else, and say, there are people who tell me we've sunk 50 crores here. Nothing's happened. No absorption. That's the message of my story. Thank you very much.